everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor and pleasure of chatting with the bassist for the Feelies and Wild Carnation and so much more, Brenda Sauter. Yay!
Hi.
So Brenda, we have all kinds of things going on with both the Feelies and Wild Carnation, but we always like to go to the past. How did you get started in music and particularly on bass?
Particularly on bass, I was in a group that had 3 or 4 guitarists and occasionally a drummer, no bassist. So I took up bass kind of out of necessity. That group sort of fizzled. I mean, one by one, people kind of left and moved on to other things. I still had the bass, and I decided, all right, I'm just going to go with this. I really want to explore this. I took lessons, and about 6 months later, the teacher said, go find a band. So it was out of necessity, but then it became a real passion.
Nice. And did you start at a very early age, or when did you decide? Because we were with a band.
Yeah, I was trying to pinpoint that date. When I started with music at a young age. In my family, everyone played an instrument. So I think if I did a little research, I could probably nail it a little closer, but I think it was 1979 when I bought that bass. And it actually sat for a while because I was not in a group. I hadn't started lessons yet. So I probably started lessons in 80 or 81.
Okay.
And then just, I feel blessed that everything just kind of, it was a real journey, but I was able. It just happened. I was in the right place at the right moment.
Absolutely. And especially with women on bass, there are not a lot of role models. Where did you find inspiration to pursue this?
I would say because I have 3 older brothers and no sisters, I just did what my brothers did. I didn't really think there was a separate role that I had to play. Mm-hmm. I started on guitar, piano and guitar, and so it was kind of a natural transition to go from guitar to bass. But actually, at the time that I was starting to, get my, if you want to call it, career off the ground, there were other female bass players. The bands that I was in and still am in played in Hoboken. I don't know if you're familiar with the Hoboken scene, but it was quite a scene in Hoboken, New Jersey. And a number of the bands had female bass players. I could say Red Buckets is one of them. Some that, might be more obscure, but then obviously like Sonic Youth. So yeah, I didn't see it as you're not allowed to play an instrument. It was more, I'm in these various groups, various bands, and yeah, I'd like to take this instrument up.
Nice. Well, and you do have a list of groups. You've played with a lot of different people. What ones that stand out particularly, again, Wild Carnation, maybe one of the longest. How did that get going?
That was Chris O'Donovan and Richard Barnes. Richard Barnes later became my husband. They met through an ad placed in the Village Voice. Yeah, you're laughing at that, but yeah, that was an important magazine for musicians, or newspaper, I guess. Sure. It was more newspaper. So they cited their influences as Feelies, REM. They got together, and then they were looking for a bass player. Actually, they were together for a few years before I came on the scene. Mm-hmm. And because Chris was a good friend of Stan Demesky from the Feelies, there was this connection. Like, Chris knew who I was, and we were at Maxwell's. Hadn't met them yet. I just happened to be at Maxwell's to see a Yo La Tango show. Chris and Rich were there to see Yo La Tango. Chris spotted me. He was encouraged to come over and talk to me. They gave me a demo tape, and there's a funny backstory because I didn't listen to it right away. I had a cheap car which didn't have a cassette player. So it just sat on my table for a couple weeks, and then I played it, and I loved it. In the meantime, they thought that, or Rich thought that I just threw it out on the highway, like put it in the tape player and just tossed it out the window.
Yeah.
So I loved the song ideas that they had, and we got together Our first practice was April of 1992 and just moved forward from there. I was kind of the default singer. I didn't intend to be a lead singer, but it just kind of happened. And one thing that I always wanted to explore but didn't really have the opportunity was to collaborate with someone to write songs. Okay. So Rich was very good at coming up with basic song structures, riffs and chords. I was more comfortable with lyrics and melody. I would find there were just too many chords to choose from, and I just couldn't get started. But if I heard chords, then I would hear melody and start to hear lyrics. So it was a perfect collaboration, and we just started writing songs together. And by October of 92, we had our first gig, which was at Maxwell's, opening for the Bats. So it was looking back, that was a real whirlwind to go from your first practice in April and then you've got a gig. We probably had barely enough songs to do a set at that point. Yeah, so again, lucky to have gotten that opportunity.
Nice. Well, and it's very exciting news. You guys actually have a reissue of your debut album coming up October 13th. And it's going to be a limited production. I think they're going to make about 500 copies. It's being pressed into vinyl. Yeah. That's kind of an exciting thing.
There's actually more to the story. So Tricycle was our first record, which actually came out Record Store Day. It was a Record Store Day release. There were 500 copies on white vinyl. They sold out. So what's actually coming out now is the next pressing of 500 on green vinyl. So yeah, when we recorded it in 94 and it was actually released in 95, it was CD only. And those are all out of print. So it was really nice to have it on vinyl. And it includes a digital download with extra, well, actually the Record Store Day had extra tracks, like live tracks and demos. So it was quite a bit of music that comes with that vinyl.
Indeed.
Yeah. And also, so I have to say that, okay, so Tricycle second pressing is now out. It's at distributors. Superbus, which is our second record or recording, is now also out on, well, it soon will be out on vinyl. It's just happenstance between two Wild Carnation records coming out, and then the Feelies, Some Kind of Love. I don't know why 2023, but that's just how it rolled. Lots of vinyl coming out.
We should talk a little bit about the Feelies too, because as you were just mentioning, this first single is coming out.
Yeah. So the album is Some Kind of Love, double album. If you go to the Feelies Facebook page or Bar None Records, there's more information there. Yeah. So I don't actually have the vinyl in my hands. I just see a little picture on Facebook, and that's as close as I've gotten to it.
Well, it's on its way. And circling back, how did you get started? How did the whole Feelies gig kind of come about?
Oh, that, again, being in the right place at the right time. I was going to a small art school in New Jersey, happened to meet a woman. We became friends, and she was from Halden. She was friends with the sister of one of the Halden musicians. So just stay with me. It can get a little confusing. So basically met someone who knew people in the Halden, New Jersey music scene. And that would have included the Feelies, the Tripes, there was Young Woo, the Willies. So there were a number of bands in Halden who, for the most part, played in each other's bands. And one of the reasons for forming these different bands was so that they could open for each other. Mm-hmm. So if you did a gig, you'd be in the opening band and the headlining band, and you wouldn't have to move equipment.
Nice.
But it had its kind of funny, practical roots to it. So I, sorry to say, I'd never heard of the Feelies before. I was more of a folkie when I was growing up, so I totally missed MC5, Velvet Underground. I totally missed that, and then had to kind of, I backtracked and learned Obviously I was now exposed to this other type of music, and then just delved in my, it would have been my early 20s, like 19, early 20s. Through this connection, I got to jam with the Tripes. There were no bass players in these groups with the exception of the Feelies, but the Feelies were kind of on hiatus at that point. Like they would play a little and then not play for months. So I played with the Tripes, and I totally loved the Tripes music. I used to follow them around whenever they did a gig. And I worked up the courage to say, if you ever want a bass player, I'd love to play, and just left it at that. I didn't want to be pushy or anything. And I'm not sure how much time went by, but it was months. I would say it was months. And then I got a phone call from John, the leader of the band, main songwriter, and said, do you want to join? We're looking for a bass player. Our first rehearsal, I thought it was going to be the Tripes, the Tripes that I had been going to see, plus me, and there were different people there. And I just kind of kept my cool, like, okay, I'll pretend that I know them, but at that first rehearsal, and then from that point forward, the Tripes were Bill Millian on percussion, Stan Demesky on drums, John Baumgartner on keyboards, Glenn Mercer on guitar, Tony Peruta, Baumgartner on woodwinds, and myself. And I hope I didn't leave anyone out. So basically, the Tripes, well, Glenn, in the original Tripes, Glenn was a percussionist, so it was very minimalist. And by the way, there have been Tripes albums put out in recent years, so what was once an out-of-print album is now available. So that, yeah, it's been re-released a number of times with different additional music. But the Tripes put out an EP, so it's that plus other music. So yeah, so Glenn was percussionist, and in the new Tripes, Glenn was now on guitar, Bill on percussion, and now there was a drummer. But I believe prior to that, Dave Weckerman, who was also in the Feelies and Young Woo, was the drummer for the Tripes for a short period of time.
Nice.
Yeah, it's kind of incestuous because everyone just keeps going in and out of groups, and they reform, and then they kind of stop playing for a while, and they come out with a new lineup, and it's just the way it happens.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of cool how in a geographic kind of localized area, you could have this swirl of moving pieces, but is still a lot of the commonalities. And I'm sure, as you mentioned these band names, I mean, people that weren't on the East Coast may have never heard of any of these folks, but obviously you have a huge following, and have been, especially I've heard with the Feelies, it's been a lot of people have drawn inspiration to go on and do their own musical careers from your music.
Right. There is a graphic of a tree. I don't know if you've seen it. It was out on the internet of the Velvet Underground as being the trunk, and then out of it comes like the Feelies and other groups, and then off of those limbs come like Nirvana and REM, and so it's pretty amazing to see how many bands were inspired by the Velvet Underground and also by the Feelies. So
very nice. And I would be remiss, because we always like to know a little bit, how do you get your sound? What gear are you playing on?
These days I have a Hartke 500 head, and I was using a Carvin cabinet, 212s and a horn, but it was just a little bit too bulky, even though it's smaller. I mean, it's much smaller than the original gear that I had, but it had to fit in a Subaru, and it was just like 2 inches too long. Anyway, so I was looking for something that was just a little more compact, and also that Carvin was getting a little bit ratty. It was covered, or is covered, in felt, and it was just getting kind of torn apart. So I went to a local music shop and was hoping to find a brand new Carvin They're not making bass cabinets right now, but they said that they intend to, and I just couldn't wait.
Yeah.
So I discovered Dark Glass,
Okay.
which I think is a newer company. I personally had never heard of them before. It's a very lightweight cabinet. It's the newer technology of not having heavy magnets. It's like this new material that's like probably half the weight. And another thing, as you're aging, you don't want to be carrying around, 80-pound cabinets. So this is, I think it's about 30 pounds, and it's compact enough where you can reach around it and not throw your back out. So for practical reasons, I needed to find something new, and I love it. And our sound man, the Feelies sound man, gave a big thumbs up.
Nice.
He loves the hard key, and he loves this Dark Glass. So I keep the carbon in the basement, and now the Dark Glass travels with me.
There
and
you
it
go.
fits.
Well, and Dark Glass, they've been around for quite some time now. I think they caught a lot more attention on the prog rock players.
Okay.
And they kind of had a following with a particular genres, and a lot of it had to do with the kind of sounds they were getting, like with their boxes. They've got a whole assortment of sounds that I personally just like to hear the straight bass sound, and it'll do that. Yeah. It'll do that too. But yes, for a lot of the rock genres, if they wanted to tweak it and change it and modify it, it had all of these possibilities. And then they kind of got enveloped into the Korg envelope, the Korg Spectre, Black Star. All of these are under one big umbrella now. Mm-hmm. So they've got a growing following, and the weight, that's a continuous theme I keep hearing, that it plagues us all. And I think of it myself, because one of my cabs has wheels, the other two don't, and so the wheels one is the first to go out the door, because who wants to carry stuff that doesn't roll? So I hear you there.
And from an aesthetic point of view, if you've ever seen Feelies gear, it's vintage. It's old, old amps and cabinets. Generally, like a tweed, tan, vinyl covering. Very kind of pristine in a way. And there was my shredded black felt that looked like it belonged at CBGB's. Yeah. So the Dark Glass really looks like it belongs, because it has it's like a silverish color. Yeah, sort of a silver, but it is the same material that the other Feelies amps are made out of. So now it really, looks nice.
Nice. And do you have a preference in strings at all?
Yeah, Diodario. I have been using ground wound round for years, because the squeaking of round wound would just drive me crazy. But having said that, round wound sound good in a band because it just gives you a little more of an edge. Mm-hmm. I've always liked more of the mid-tones, the mellow, more like a McCartney sound. Yeah. Where you hear those warm, it's very bassy, but there are those mid-tones that are prominent and warm sounding. When we were recording here before, I used various basses, and I borrowed one that had wound round, really squeaky wound round strings, and it sounded good because it had a little more, bite to it. Mm-hmm. And it just fit the sound of that particular song. Yeah, I actually have wound round on, I keep a set on one bass, and I keep the ground wound round on my Mustang. But then after seeing Get Back, I saw McCartney with those black strings on his bass, and I thought, whoa, what is that? Because whatever he did to get his sound, I wanted that, So I bought the, Roto Sounds, I think they're called. Okay. They're English, and had them put on another bass, and I like that. I like the sound. Still, I'm not totally set on it, because I wonder, all right, does it fit with the Feelies sound? It seems to, but I I didn't go out and restring all the basses with McCartney strings. I'm still holding on to different types.
Gotcha.
Actual bass guitar gear. I started out, the first bass that I bought was an Ibanez, just a standard Ibanez, couple $100.
Mm-hmm.
But I was really set on getting a Rickenbacker, and I saved up and finally got a Rickenbacker. By the time I joined the Trice and the Feelies, I was playing Rickenbacker. Love the sound of them, even though like that I would say is an opposite sound of McCartney, because the Rickenbacker is, high end, low end, sort of a colder sounding curve.
Mm-hmm.
But I just love this. I would hear recordings or hear something on the radio, and it's like, that's got to be a Rickenbacker. And then when I saw the first video of REM on MTV and saw Mike Mills's Rickenbacker, I was, really like, inspired. But Rickenbackers are heavy, so I moved on to a P bass, which is not much lighter. I had trouble playing. I started to develop carpal tunnel syndrome in about the mid-'80s, and so I really wanted to get a small scale. And I don't know if they actually really officially existed at that point. So I actually had a special neck made by a guitar maker by the last name of Kulik, and that's actually stuck on this former P bass, and I just had different things done to it. I took the paint off, so it was all like natural wood. So the Kulik bass was what I used for many, many years with a regular P bass as a backup.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the the Feelies got back together in 2008. You could say we were on a long break from 91 to 2008. And then a year or so later, we played a show with Real Estate, and the bass player had a Fender Mustang, and I saw how small it was, and I struck up a conversation with him. And at that point, you couldn't get Mustangs, so I had to just stick with the Kulik. I would go through music catalogs from time to time, and never any Mustangs. And then one day there was a Mustang, and I just ordered it. You could choose, I think it was black, red, or white, and I went for the red.
Nice.
And that's what I've been playing since then. And again, our sound man loves the sound. It's really balanced, really easy to play.
Sweet.
So I don't collect. I don't like to have a lot of basses around. I just want a few. And so if I find something that I'm happy with, like, that's it. I'm not going to go looking for 1950s or 60s, whatever. I just want something that I can play easily.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you've avoided getting gear acquisition syndrome, which plagues the bass community
and guitar community.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, as we look ahead, what is in the future? I know we have the releases for the Feelies and Wild Carnation. Some have tour plans, anything coming up? We
just do shows when we can.
Okay.
So Feelies, there are 2 shows coming up in November. Wild Carnation, we thought we might play somewhere during the summer, but it's end of August now, so the summer it's kind of come and gone. So yeah, we hope to play shows, but post-COVID is just kind of it's a different. I don't know. Maybe if you're a bit younger, you just kind of go with the flow. But when you were, you couldn't do anything for a couple years, and now you're in your 60s or so.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to figure out, well, how do you get into these clubs now? Some of them reopened, some of them closed for good. How do you navigate what seems to be a new situation? So like Wild Carnation, we'd love to do more shows, but we're just kind of in a little bit of a doldrum right now about like, okay, how do we book shows? Where can we go? And so it's basically East Coast shows, definitely East Coast shows for the Feelies. Feelies are not traveling far from home these days. That's just the way that it is. So people fly in from all over the world when we do have shows, it's amazing how nice the fans are. look, look on our Facebook pages. And
that was going to be my next thing.
Okay.
They can look at the webpage, thefeeliesweb.com, and then Facebook, both for the Feelies and for Wild Carnation, right?
Yeah. And Wild Carnation's also on Bandcamp. We have a YouTube channel. We're on SoundCloud, but I, personally have not gotten. I had time and I was getting ahead and getting it all on there, and then just there just isn't enough time in a day. So there isn't a lot of activity on those websites. Actually, Facebook, Wild Carnation Facebook would have the most activity, and the Feelies Facebook page as well. Like those are easy to just pop something on. The others are just a little more of a challenge for me personally.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to chat with us and share your story and all of these wonderful things that are happening. Folks, you've seen her here on Bass Musician Magazine, Brenda Sauter.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. Stan was in Modern Drummer, so now I can say I was in Bass Musician.
Absolutely. Alrighty.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.